questo potenziale passivo e provato samo prije ulaska trebamo. Mislim da je prije ulaska stvari, vaša mapa ne svi nas iznenadi, kako je to tako rekao. Ne znam, svako puno mislim da napisam sam trebalo vremena da sjedim. Kažem, definitivno je teža. Da. 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 Da.
Like if I want to like fold it like one page after the other instead of moving.
How is it?
Yeah. It should be a setting in its information, so I don't understand. There should be a setting right here that says that you can from one
move
page
from
to the
one.
other.
Maybe.
Okay,
Like this,
perfect.
okay.
Thank you. So I just need to. Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome to today's guest lecture, organized as part of the project 10th anniversary of Japanese Studies lecture series at Pula, with the general support of the Japan Foundation. This series marks a decade since the establishment of the Japanese Studies program at our university, and it is our aim to celebrate this milestone by bringing distinguished scholars from Japan and Europe to share their research and insights with us. So all lectures will be recorded, archived, and made available to the public via an online platform, ensuring wide availability and long-term usability of the educational content. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Gala Follaco, Associate Professor of Japanese Studies at the University of Naples, Orientale. Trained between Italy and Japan, she has held visiting positions at several leading universities, including Waseda University, University of Sydney, of Edinburgh, Yale University, and University of Bordeaux, and recently spent a year at Waseda University as a Japan Foundation Fellow. So Professor Follaco is both a distinguished translator of major Japanese authors and a leading scholar of urban representation in modern Japanese literature. Her work ranges from studies of Nagai Kafu, as in her monograph A Sense of the City, to translations of writers such as Higuchi Ichio and edited volumes on Asian urban cultures. Her recent publications include an article on Meiji soundscapes in the Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies and the monograph Cronache di Vita Urbana da Edo a Tokyo. She is currently developing a book on spatial justice in Meiji literature. So today's lecture, titled Urban Transformation in the Making of Modern Japanese Literature, explores how the development of modern Japanese literature took shape alongside the transformation of Tokyo in the Meiji period. We are truly fortunate to have Professor Follaco with us today, and I'm certain her lecture will be both thought-provoking and inspiring. And please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Gala.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Silly. Thank you very much. It was a bit too generous, I think, but thank you. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I arrived yesterday in Pula, and it's amazing. It's an amazingly beautiful city, and I'm very much interested in cities. So I have seen many, and I must say it's really wonderful. And the first thing I said to my husband over the phone was, we have to come back here together on vacation because it's going to be wonderful. So good morning, and thank you for being here. So today I would like to explore with you, as Professor Seeley anticipated, a crucial moment in the formation of modern Japan, which is the Meiji period. And in particular, the intertwined processes of urban and literary modernization that unfolded during those transformative decades. My central argument today, but in my research at large actually, is that these two trajectories, so the reshaping of the city and the reinvention of literature, did not simply occur side by side at the same time. They emerged together, they interacted continuously, and ultimately defined one another. So to understand Meiji literature, we must understand Meiji urbanity and vice versa. So after the Meiji Restoration of 1868, Japanese intellectuals found themselves confronting a world which was suddenly open to Euro-American ideals. Many cultural imports circulating at the time, the modern novel held a premium position. It offered a realist mode of representation and a narrative form capable of expressing the tensions of a rapidly changing society. At the same time, the shift toward writing in the vernacular, so the closest possible approximation of the spoken language, was seen as a powerful vehicle for communicating new ideas of progress and national renewal. This combination of a Western-inspired narrative model and an increasingly accessible literary language seemed to promise cultural transformation and ultimately social improvement. Yet it is important to resist the temptation to view the Meiji moment as a clean break with the past. Recent scholarship has emphasized that many of the debates central to the so-called modernization or westernization of Japan had already been circulating in the late Tokugawa period. Much of what we associate with Meiji modernity, and including its social anxieties, its intellectual tensions, and even its literary aspirations, was built on foundations laid several decades earlier. It is now well known that the Meiji transformation was as much a conservative revolution than a radical one. The literary field was profoundly shaken by this disruption. Traditional hierarchies collapsed and long-established genres began to lose their authority. A new form of writing emerged, one that scholar Munakata Kazushige has described as an imperialist literature, not because of its political content alone, but because it sought to expand into geographical, linguistic, and conceptual territories that had previously been inaccessible. This expansion was inseparable from the rise of Tokyo as the new capital. The city became both the subject and the stage for the Meiji literary imagination, a space where writers experimented with new ways of seeing, describing, and of course, narrating urban life. So the influence of Euro-American capitalism and imperialism was unmistakable. The literary canon shifted decisively toward prose fiction, especially the novel, which moved closer to European forms and further away from the Gesaku traditions of the Tokugawa period. Scenic styles declined, and genres that could not be aligned with Western models were gradually devalued. To be modern, a novel had to tell realistic stories in a language that ordinary people could understand. So urban transformation was a backdrop to this literary revolution, but as I will discuss shortly, it was also one of its driving forces. With the abolition of the feudal class system, social identities were destabilized. Foreign ideas and technologies spread rapidly, carried by the modernization of infrastructure, transportation, and urban life itself. By the end of the century, writers influenced by European realism and naturalism were situating their schools squarely in Tokyo. Yet these modern urban novels didn't imitate the European city because they blended the emerging metropolitan imagery of Tokyo with memories of Edo and with narrative motifs inherited from the older Gesaku tradition. Urban scenes became active elements in the construction of character, plot, and meaning. So my talk today will examine this double process, so urban modernization and literary modernization, and show how each provided both the conditions and the conceptual vocabulary for the others. By looking at Meiji Japan through this dual lens, we can better understand how modernity itself in Japan was imagined, confronted, and also lived. So when discussing the formation of modern Japanese urban space, it is useful to begin with a periodization proposed by the historian Narita Ryuichi. Narita identifies three major phases in the development of the modern Japanese city and the emergence of what he calls the city as system, which is the city understood as a complex organism governed by interdependent functional goals. That is the city as system. The first phase stretches from the 1860s to the end of the 19th century. This is a pivotal moment of transition, during which, among the political and cultural disruptions of the late Tokugawa period, a recognizably modern urban model begins to emerge. During these decades, new forms of spatial organization and new administrative, infrastructural, and social systems started to emerge, laying the groundwork for later developments. The second phase spans from around 1900 to the mid-1930s, with a particularly intense period of change in the late 1920s and early 1930s. During these years, the modern urban model not only solidifies, but also expands outwards. Japanese cities, and Tokyo in particular, grow beyond their historical centers, diversify their functions, and adopt planning practices to address both the needs of rapid economic modernization and Japan's increasing imperial ambitions. The third phase runs from around 1935 through the end of World War II and into the early post-war years. It is a period in which the tensions and issues that emerged during the second phase become reorganized and institutionalized under the pressures of wartime mobilization. At the same time, the spatial structures that would characterize the post-war Japanese city begin to take shape. So now my research focuses on the first two of these phases. So from the 1860s to the late 1930s. I concentrate on this time span because it is precisely in moments of heightened volatility, political, social, and economic volatility, that urban models are at their most fluid, at their most experimental, and most responsive to competing ideologies and also material constraints. This was an extraordinarily dynamic period. The collapse of the Tokugawa regime, the accelerated modernization of the Meiji area, and the intensification of industrialization and imperial expansion in the early 20th century created conditions ripe for the rethinking, contestation, and reconfiguration of urban space. One transition in particular is both fundamental and impossible to ignore, which is the shift from the Bakumatsu period, so the late Tokugawa period, to the early years of the Meiji Restoration. Contrary to the common narrative that frames 1868 as a total rupture, many of the urban phenomena that we associate with Meiji period cities had already begun to form under late Tokugawa rule. Recognizing this continuity, which is often obscured by more linear accounts of Japanese modernization, will allow us to see how the dynamics of modern urbanism were rooted in earlier developments, well before the state officially articulated its modernization agenda. In this sense, studying the first two stages identified by Narita means to me observing the city at a moment of maximum transformation, when structures had not yet stabilized, when the tensions between past and future were directly inscribed in the built environment, and when political, economic, and social choices manifested themselves visibly and often dramatically in the forms of the city. Since the transformation set in motion by the industrial revolutions of the 19th century all over the world, literature has increasingly become a crucial medium for representing and emotionally processing urban life. Just think about Dickens for British literature, or the naturalist novel in France. Literary writing offers a space, and you can imagine it as a sort of imaginative canvas on which the changing conditions of modernity can take narrative and symbolic form. Many literary works not only depict the city, but also participate in the production of knowledge about the city. At times, they reinforce established hierarchies of visibility and legitimacy. For instance, deciding which spaces, subjects, or experiences count as urban. At other times, literary works quietly or overtly challenge those same hierarchies. In this way, literary urban studies has expanded far beyond the narrow focus on textual form or literariness. It now includes questions of spatial organization, infrastructure, and, perhaps most importantly, the lived experience of city dwellers. While literature often mirrors prevailing urban dynamics, it also interrogates them. Others develop formal strategies that expose inequalities, imagine alternative geographies, or articulate new forms of resistance within the urban environment. In addition, literature's own conditions of production, for instance, its reliance on serialized formats, mass readerships, and dense distribution networks, materially tie literature to the city. So the city is not just what literature describes. It is also, I would say, the ecosystem that enables literary production itself. A particularly revealing example of what I have just said comes from the profound disruptions triggered by the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. As you know, Tokyo's publishing world collapsed into crisis. Presses were destroyed, distribution networks were shattered, and many established publishers were unable to recover just the same one. It was very difficult to get water to produce paper, and so this was a great problem for presses. Yet, this moment of devastation also opened the door for innovation. Some attempts at revival failed, but others proved transformative. For instance, the initiatives launched by Kaizosha and a handful of similarly ambitious publishers. These efforts contributed to what became known as the Enpon boom, referring to inexpensive 1 yen books, which were sold at remarkably low prices, the price of 1 yen. The Enpon phenomenon began as a marketing strategy, but in the end it reshaped the entire structure of the publishing industry by introducing large-scale, low-cost, high-quality compilations of literary and intellectual works. It dramatically expanded access to books among urban readers, altered the economics of authorship, and contributed to the emergence of the modern professional writer. So at this point, writers could start making money out of literature, which wasn't happening before. In many ways, the Enpon boom exemplifies how literary culture is entwined with urban modernity, driven by mass readerships, supported by new distribution systems, and influenced by the rhythms and the events of city life. So authors, editors, booksellers, and readers are all participants in these urban cultural economies. Their interactions from a broader ecology of meaning-making grounded in the material and social realities of the city. By approaching literary texts with attention to both aesthetic form, of course, which is all we do when we treat literary works, but also spatial context, so the way literature interacts with the space. By doing this, we gain a richer understanding of how cities are inhabited and continually reimagined. Literature serves not only as a mirror of urban experience, as we have said, but also as an active force in redefining what urban life can be. So my first case study would be Hanjoki, which is the subject of my latest monograph, which is, alas, in Italian, but it's available open access, so if you want, you can if you want. If you have nothing better to do, you can just look up for. And I'm speaking very casually of a Hanjoki genre, although I must admit that I'm not sure whether such a genre really existed or not. In 1958, the writer and illustrator Kimura Shohachi, who incidentally in the late 1930s had drawn the illustrations for Nagai Kafu's novel Mokutokidan, and apparently the illustrations were so successful that Kafu was a bit jealous, and so it just excluded the illustrations from the volume edition of Mokutokidan. But by the way, this very same Kimura Shohachi spoke of a Hanjoki genre, he calls it genre in katakana, in Japanese, and included among the most representative works of this genre also Takamizawa Shigeru's Tokyo Kaika Hanjoshi, which is one of the texts I will focus on today. So in the 1950s, Kimura acknowledged the Hanjoki genre, but from this perspective, from the perspective of Meiji, I find it very difficult and at the same time very easy to define this text as such. It is difficult because the corpus of writing is very diverse, but for the very same reason it's easy. It is characterized by a normativity which is not very strict, and probably because it was hardly considered as serious. So being not serious, it didn't have very strict norms. Professor Evelyn Schulz from the University of Munich, who is a very important scholar, but very important for me and for my research, as you will see, has tackled the issue of genre and canon in connection with Hanjoki, noting how their reception as literature, as bungaku, has been affected by there not being shosetsu. So accounts of flourishing are generally valued as documents rather than narratives, although they do convey specific narratives of the city. In fact, Schulz distinguishes Tokyo Hanjoki, so Hanjoki regarding Tokyo, as a genre in itself, given their specificities, especially after the turn of the century, and the adherence of these works to a common frame. However, I'm not interested in defining the genre today, but in assessing its relevance to the broader notion of urban representation in the modern period. So by my lights, this is what ultimately makes the Hanjoki canonical. Hanjoki are usually associated with Gesaku. More precisely, these texts are addressed as Kambun Gesaku, which means playful writings in Kambun, playful writings in literary Sinitic. Even though their contents are not fictional, they have been considered as something in between anecdotal narrative of the Tokugawa period and the Meiji novel, so something in between them. These accounts focus on places, but unlike other kinds of topographical writing, such as the Meishoki, the records of famous places, the records of Meisho, or guidebooks, their authors seem more interested in entertaining the reader and sharing a worldview rather than providing information about regions, cities, or neighborhoods they write about. Some authors of Hanjoki also wrote Meishoki or guidebooks, and although contents and topic disposition may occasionally overlap, the Hanjoki display a unique writing technique, as argued by Maeda. This uniqueness is because urban spaces appear segmented, fragmentary, whereas Meishoki are embedded in what he terms a spatial conception that grasps the city as a homogeneous whole. So in the Meishoki, you have the city as something homogeneous. In Hanjoki, you have it as something fragmented. I would like to introduce the Hanjoki genre, or whatever it is, through its foundational work, which is Edo Hanjoki, written by Terakado Seiken between 1832 and 1836. Its title refers to flourishing, Hanjo, but this was never meant literally. In fact, Edo at that time was experiencing the opposite. The temple famine, devastating fires, epidemics, and soaring rice prices marked these years as a moment of deep crisis. Terakado's text documents these events, but more importantly, it documents how ordinary people experience them in their daily life. Because of this, nearly every later work with the word Hanjo in its title engages with Terakado's model. He established a narrative pattern that would influence enormously modern urban writing in Japan. A focus on the city as a lived space where human presence gives meaning to the urban landscape. So if we think of recent global events like COVID-19, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter protests, the pro-Palestine protests, we remember images of empty city centers or crowds filling symbolic spaces. Urban space becomes powerful only when it is connected to human activity or to the absence of human activity. Hanjoki texts work exactly like this. The city they describe is physical, it is real, but its true character emerges only through the people who occupy it. Scholars such as the late Andrew Marcus describe Terakado's perspective as a bird's eye view rather than a static panorama. Unlike guidebooks which explain the history and cultural significance of famous sites, Hanjoki focus on the current life of the city, its inhabitants, and their voices. I'm very interested in these voices, which is why I wrote an article on soundscapes in Hanjoki, because voices are central. As Evelyn Schutz once again has shown, even though these are non-fiction works, they include literary devices, dialogues, and sometimes also fictional elements. Terakado frequently quotes the words of common townspeople, grounding his social criticism in everyday speech rather than scholarly theory. This dialogic and often humorous tone also reflects the influence of Tokugawa Gesaku, so the popular satirical literature. One key technique is that of ugachi, which literally means hole digging, and is a way in Gesaku to expose contradictions in contemporary society. So to dig beneath the surface of what is seen, what appears to show the hypocrisy and the irony of all things. Even the notion of flourishing of Hanjo in Hanjoki often works as an ironic reversal. So at the heart of Terakado's writing lies the tension between two terms which are very important, muyo and yuyo. So muyo meaning useless and yuyo meaning the opposite, so useful. Terakado wanted to secure an official position. He wanted to become a bureaucrat, but he failed the exam. And so at this point, he turned to writing and began fashioning himself as a muyosha, so a useless person. Paradoxically, this stance gave him freedom to criticize society from the outside while remaining fully engaged in urban life. He challenged the assumption that novelty or official authority automatically equaled usefulness, mocking, for instance, what he calls the arrogant doctors he considered worse than useless. His satire unsettled many fellow scholars. One of them, this is a very famous episode, there was a scholar, Nakajima Soin, who was also the counselor of the shogun, so he was someone very important, wrote a competing Hanjoki in a more orthodox and correct kambun, because he thought that Terakado's kambun was really bad, and so he wrote one in a standard, correct, beautiful kambun. But it never achieved the popularity of Edo Hanjoki, who became a bestseller, especially among young students who often read it secretly. And this was a problem. So eventually the shogunate banned the work, fearing that it portrayed Edo as immoral, especially through the vivid descriptions of the so-called bad places, the akusho, such as the Yoshiwara, so the brothel district, and the theater district. So the shogunate was afraid that the young students, especially from samurai descent who were supposed to go to Edo, would think of Edo not as the capital of the shogunate, but as a city of vice. So this would be definitely a problem. For Terracado, however, these marginal spaces reveal the true dynamics of urban flourishing, further illustrating his ongoing exploration of the Muyo-Yuyo contrast. In the Meiji period, authors of Hanjoki continued to follow the structure established by Terracado Seiken, and his influence remained unmistakable. One of the most prominent examples is Hattori Busho, whose Tokyo Shin Hanjoki became the most successful Meiji-era account of urban flourishing. Like Terracado, Busho called himself a Muyo no Hito, so a useless person once again, and built his work around the same organizational principles. What makes Busho especially interesting is the historical moment in which he wrote. His book appeared almost at the same time as Fukuzawa Yukichi's major works, including An Encouragement of Learning. We are talking about the early 1870s. This led some to see the two figures as opposites, so Fukuzawa representing the future and Busho representing the past, because Busho would write in Kanbun, and he would quote Terracado Seiken, and he would be fond of the Edo period. But this is an oversimplification. Busho was not a nostalgic. In fact, he embraced innovation whenever it genuinely benefited society. The apparent contrast between them reflects a larger contemporary debate over useful and useless learning, echoing the earlier Muyo-Yuyo binomial. Busho was also a highly skilled journalist. His work for the newspaper Tokyo Shishi shows both sharp satire and a sincere desire to contribute to the creation of a better society. Far from rejecting the West, he often supported Western-style practical knowledge. In one hard article of the newspaper, he argued that Japan would benefit greatly from combining Asian moral education with European practical skills. At the same time, he warned against adopting innovation superficially, without considering essential issues such as moral order and good governance, revealing his Confucian background. Busho believed that writing should serve society, and he was also a vocal supporter of women's education, so much that some scholars see him, perhaps exaggerating a bit, as an early advocate of civil rights and women's rights. By the way, his popularity was enormous. Tokyo Shin Hanjoki sold at least 10 to 15,000 copies, which is a lot for 1874. And this made him one of the most successful authors of the period. Publishers often commissioned him to write prefaces or revise texts, and sometimes his name appeared as translator of works he had barely contributed to, proof that his name alone guaranteed sales. Yet, despite this fame and the many imitations his work inspired, Busho's style remained unique. His pose as an observer, calmly surveying Tokyo during the Restoration, was one of his signature traits, and some critics have compared his ability to combine diverse elements to the dramaturgy of Chikamatsu. Although Busho follows the path laid out by Seiken and reuses many of his themes, his aim is not to nostalgically compare past and present. Instead, he tries to capture the restless, rapidly changing environment of modern Tokyo. Like Terracado, he moves quickly through the city, following its streets, sounds, and crowds. Tokyo Shin Hanjoki is filled with explicit reference to Terracado, but it is far from a simple update of Edo Hanjoki. Busho presents himself as a true urbanite, someone fully integrated into the codes of modern city life. And this is clear in his treatment of visitors from the countryside, whom he calls Yamadashi, which is a sort of degrading term to refer from people from the province. These Yamadashi stand out as unsophisticated newcomers within the urban space, and this highlights Busho's own urban identity, the way he wanted to fashion himself. In adapting Terakado's framework, Busho replaces old Edo topics with modern equivalents. Instead, for instance, of the bamboo palanquin, he describes the rickshaw. Instead of traditional trades, he writes a full chapter on beef sellers, which was new in the Meiji period. These details are valuable for understanding everyday life in early Meiji Tokyo, of course, but they also point to a deeper literary mechanism, which is that of intertextuality. Meiji authors often mention Terakado's work explicitly, but they also engage with him implicitly by using Edo Hanjoki as a structural model. Their readers, familiar both with the original text and with contemporary Tokyo, would immediately recognize the differences between the original and the copy, and it is in these differences that the meaning emerges. This leads to a final idea, that of familiarity. As the Hanjoki tradition developed, its intertextual layers became richer and more complex. By invoking earlier works, Meiji writers invited readers to view the space of post-restoration Tokyo through the lens of late Edo urban culture. Evelyn Schultz notes that while both Terakado and Busho wrote during a period of crisis, Terakado's Edo was stagnant, was a city that was not moving, that was not growing. Whereas Busho's Tokyo was poised to move forward, especially demographically. Thus, Busho is not merely imitating Seiken, Terakado, he is engaging with him, expanding the tradition and helping to maintain a literary lineage of Tokyo's representation. In the early Meiji period, Hanjoki about Tokyo show different approaches and styles, but they all rely on earlier models, especially Edo Hanjoki for structure. My focus is on how these works engage with modernization and how the authors map the city's transformation onto Tokyo itself. In this context, the contrast between Hattori Busho and Takamizawa Shigeru is particularly instructive. Busho's writing emphasizes how modernization affects individuals rather than the city as a capital, reflecting that Tokyo was still far from being fully recognized as the imperial center. So this is Busho's thesis. Takamizawa, by contrast, seemed concerned with the city's emerging status as a capital, exploring what this change means for its urban life. So Takamizawa was only 25 when he wrote Tokyo Kaika Hanjoshi, and he had already published a book on world history. He was very precocious. In the preface, he confesses to living a dissipated life, which is a typical Hanjoki gesture, signaling the author's uselessness. His work focuses on the relationship between people and urban space, and his critical and ironic tone recalls Busho. While some scholars suggest a direct influence from Busho, I think that the timing makes this unlikely because Takamizawa's work came out a couple of months after Busho, so it's impossible that he actually was influenced by it. Instead, Takamizawa draws explicitly on Edo Hanjoki, naming Terakado in the prologue and referencing his work in the preface while establishing his own topics. Like the Miyuki, the emperor's official excursions through the city, which was something that happened in Tokyo after Tokyo became the capital, because the Miyuki was frequent in Kyoto, in the real capital, before the modern era, but there wasn't regular Miyuki in Edo. So it is something new that the new status of the capital brought. These parades were new spectacles that highlighted Tokyo's emerging prestige as a capital. Takamitawa's descriptions emphasize the street-level experience of the city. The parades are announced through a chaotic mix of sounds, for instance, horses, carriages, crowds, all kind of cacophonic sounds, rather than formal signals, creating confusion and surprise for all the citizens. Observers are often bewildered or anxious, reflecting the disorienting effect of modernization on everyday life. His ironic exclamations like, flourishing, enlightenment, which is, Hanjo, Kaika, convey anxiety and critique rather than admiration, showing that urban change can be disruptive and even frightening and dangerous. In short, Takamizawa's Hanjoshi is deeply engaged with the human experience of the transforming city, highlighting both the excitement and the disorder of early Meiji Tokyo. While he inherits much from earlier authors, his focus on people's reaction to urban modernization and his sharp, ironic critique make his work a unique and valuable record of the city's transition into a capital. And that is a page from Tokyo Kaika Hanjoshi, just to show you how those texts were. So they were in Sydney. Just a second, I need to drink. Okay. So as we have seen, Hanjoki were immensely popular in the Meiji period, documenting the city life in remarkable detail while revealing a sophisticated engagement with urban change and modernization. Authors like Busho and Takamizawa portrayed the evolving city through the lived experience of the citizens, devoting attention to the sounds, the chaos, the surprises of a city in transformation. This perspective is crucial when we turn to Nagai Kafu, my favorite writer, and a writer celebrated for his literary depictions of Tokyo. Kafu repeatedly read Hanjoki from both the Tokugawa and Meiji periods, and his works informed the way he imagined and recorded urban space. In many works pertaining what I would call his demi-monde literature, Kafu situates his histories in the pleasure stories in the pleasure quarters, consciously referencing older Hanjoki like the ones we have been discussing until now. It is an important lineage that he is willing to honor. Kafu uses it to trace memory and continuity amid rapid urban change, highlighting how areas like Shimbashi or Ginza serves as anchors of familiarity for individuals within a transforming Tokyo. There are some stories whose protagonists' perception of danger and discomfort in unfamiliar districts contrasts with the warmth and safety of their known spaces. Similarly to Meiji Hanjoki authors, Kafu is attentive to human experience in the city, combining visual, auditory, and even tactile sensations to convey how urban modernization affects perception and emotion. In doing so, Kafu continues the Hanjoki's legacy of observing, recording, and reflecting on Tokyo, bridging literary tradition with the realities of modern urban life. Although Nagai Kafu's fascination with the demi-monde, so the geisha districts, the entertainment quarters, and other marginalized spaces, was deeply rooted in his lifelong interest in Tokugawa culture, the urban dimension of his work goes far beyond a simple Tokyo-Edo binary or nostalgic recreation of the recent past. Scholars such as Hutchinson have argued that this district functioned as another world within Kafu's narratives, serving as a backdrop for a counter-discourse of modernization. Similarly, Schultz, in her 1997 study, introduced the idea of the aesthetic hunter-world to describe Kafu's unique way of representing Tokyo. What is particularly striking is that unlike ghettos or physically isolated spaces, the demi-monde in Kafu's work is conceptually marginal but geographically proximate. His characters, who are geisha, maids, actors, and prostitutes, often live very close to the city center in the streets such as Shimbashi and Ginza. Yet, their sense of confinement is mental, imagined, and social, rather than strictly physical. Crossing the boundaries of these quarters exposes them to the larger city, but it also places them in situations where they feel out of place, where the safety and predictability of their own districts are lost. In this sense, the demi-monde is an exclusive space of self-confinement, so a conceptual territory that both shelters and limits its inhabitants. At the same time, The proximity of these quarters to the city's central areas provides Kafu with rich narrative possibilities. The interactions and frictions between the margins and the center act as a trigger for storytelling, offering a lens through which he can explore the tensions of modernization. Yet Kafu never idealizes these spaces. The demi-monde is both a refuge and a place vulnerable to change. Its survival depends on adapting to the very social and economic transformations that threaten its stability. In this way, Kafu captures a cycle of rise and fall, of continuity and disruption, reflecting not only the evolution of Tokyo, but also the complex interplay between space, society, and the imagination of those who inhabit the city. So now I want to talk very briefly about three of Nagai Kafu's major works, which are Ude Kurabe, Okamezasa, and Tsuyu no Hatosaki, and of how they help us understand the urban experience in early modern Tokyo, especially thanks to the interplay between reality and illusion. One of the first things to notice about Kafu's writing is his use of what I call temporary suspension. That is, he often poses the flow of everyday reality to blend the real with the dreamlike. And while this is present in many of his works, it is most clearly expressed in Tsuyu no Hatosaki. Here, the protagonist, Kimie, who is a maid at the Café Don Juan in Ginza. The protagonist is Kimie. She is a maid at this place, Don Juan, which is a cafe modeled on the very famous Café Taiga of Ginza, which was like the most famous cafe of the time, which Kafu himself frequented, like many other intellectuals of the time. So the story takes place during the rainy season. But when Kimie falls unconscious due to a fever, something important happens. Because upon waking, she realizes that her life so far has been an illusion. She and the other characters have been moving through Ginza as if on a stage, like actors performing a play. This moment captures what is so unique about Kafu's urban writing. He doesn't just describe the city, but he makes it dreamlike. And at the same time, he highlights the ambiguities and contradictions of a district like Ginza, which was a place that epitomized Japan's economic growth, but was also morally and socially complex. Critics and writers had very different reactions to this novel, Tsuyu no Hatosaki. Tanizaki Jeiichiro praised it as a popular history of the Showa area, because the Showa era had just started, and admired Kafu's detachment and his ability to convey the local color of Tokyo. Kawabata Yasunari, on the other hand, was disappointed, and he felt that the characters were stereotypical, except for Kimie, whom he described as a nana in the modern city. Ikushima Ryoichi even called the characters of Tsuyu no Hatosaki dolls molded for the purpose of escaping boredom, while Sakagami Hiroichi compared Kimie to Komayo in Ude Kurabe, emphasizing the superficial beauty of Ginza. What is striking, however, is that all commentators agree on one point. Kimie's character is inseparable from her time and place. She is a product of Ginza. She moves through it as much as she is shaped by Ginza. And her awakening from illness, which is a literal and a metaphorical moment, makes the dreamlike nature of her existence even clearer. If we look back to Ude Kurabe, we can see the roots of this approach. There, the demi-monde functions as an exclusive space. Outsiders are always partially rejected. The pleasures of the district are both alluring and fragile. In Tsuyu no Hatosaki, Kafu takes this further. The district is no longer a safe haven, but a mirror of modernity, because pleasure is fleeting, morality is compromised, and the line between illusion and reality is blurred. Characters, as Ikushima said, are dolls. They imitate life, but cannot fully live it, reflecting the selfishness and moral ambiguity of the wider society. Between these two works, Kafu wrote Okamezasa, which explores the degeneration of the entertainment districts. He describes it as humorous, but in reality, the song is bitterly ironic. The main character, Uzaki, is a painter without talent, surrounded by shallow and venal characters. Even the supposedly respectable people are morally compromised. Here, Kafu shows how politics, economics, and social pressures have penetrated spaces that were once marginal and protective, transforming them into a reflection of modern society's contradictions. Scholars like Stephen Snyder and Donald Keane interpret Kafu's detachment from his characters as an expression of nihilism, so his disillusionment with the modern city and his own times. So when we look at these three works together, a pattern emerges. Uday Kurabe presents the demi-monde as a complex but somewhat idealized retreat. Okamezasa shows its corruption and entanglement with the broader city. And Tsuyono Atosaki presents Ginza as fully dreamlike, beautiful, yet morally ambiguous, where pleasure and illusion are inseparable. What Kafu achieves through these narratives is remarkable, in my opinion. He shows us that urban space is never just a backdrop. He shows us that it influences the characters' lives, their consciousness, their illusions, and their dreams, even. His work captures the allure and the disillusionment of modernization, the fragility of marginal spaces, and the tension between reality and fantasy in the city. All the narrative strategies that we have seen Kafu employ, some of which were inspired by Tokugawa era models through his reading of Hanjoki, and others hinting at modernist experimentation, come together with particular force in his 1931 work, Tsuyono Atosaki. And this is no coincidence. In the years between his earlier works and this novel, Tokyo experienced the catastrophe, so the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, and also the massive rebuilding that followed the catastrophe. The distraction and subsequent reconstruction profoundly affected both the city's physical space and its social rhythms. In Tsuyono Atosaki, we can see how this disruption heightens Kafu's attention to temporality, illusion, and the tensions between confinement and freedom within urban life. These concerns, which were already present in the earlier work, find their most vivid expression against the backdrop of a city literally reinventing itself. In the final part of today's lecture, we will examine how the earthquake and Tokyo's reconstruction influenced Kafu's urban imagination, and other writers' urban imagination, and the way they represented a city in transformation. Because if we consider a city, the literary city as an object of study, one of the most revealing cases in Japanese literature is Japanese literature produced during the reconstruction of Tokyo. In this text, the tension between urban order and disorder, between social norms and everyday practices, reflects public perceptions of justice and equity within society. Part of my present research project focuses on how writers document not only the material destruction of the city, but also the moral and civic transformations that accompanied it, offering a prism through which we can read Japanese modernity and its contradictions. Within the context of Japanese literary modernity, one of the most significant points of inquiry concerns the representation of urban reconstruction during the Taisho period, which was a period marked by rapid and traumatic transformation, not only because of the quake, but also because of how the country was approaching its imperialist phase. Japanese cities, and Tokyo in particular, emerge in this era as spaces where structural vulnerability, aspirations for modernization, and profound social tensions intersect. A key concept for understanding this complex scenario is urban resilience, the capacity of the city and its inhabitants to adapt to crisis, confront change, and imagine new forms of existence within the urban fabric. And the turning point, of course, was the quake, that caused over 1,100 deaths and left entire communities homeless. So it was a major urban event. It exposed the fragility of infrastructure, but also the deep social inequalities embedded in urban life. At the same time, it sparked an unprecedented national debate. How should Tokyo be rebuilt? and crucially, what kind of future identity the city should have in the 1920s. It is in this context that we encountered the figure of Goto Shinbe, who had been mayor of Tokyo and was now appointed head of the reconstruction office. His ambitious plan sought not merely to repair the damage, but to transform Tokyo into a modern, technologically advanced capital comparable to the great cities of Europe and North America. Wide boulevards, innovative infrastructure, and an urban vision that embodied national pride were his central objectives. Many of these plans were only partially realized due to political and economic obstacles, yet they left a lasting mark on Japan's urban imagination. And literature of the period is a privileged witness of this moment. The writers who described Tokyo at the time present the city as a space where crises can become an opportunity to exercise agency, to redefine the relationship between individual communities and power. There are some collective projects, such as the Daitokyo Hanjoki, who further expanded on these interpretive frameworks, enriching the public discourse on post-earthquake urban life. Since I'm a little bit short on time, I will skip the Daitokyo Hanjoki, not because it's not interesting, it's actually very, very much interesting, but because there's something more crucial I want to talk to you about, which is, Minakami Takitaro. It is a complex backdrop, that of the reconstruction of the city after the quake. And the case of Minakami Takitaro offers particularly insightful reflections of urban rebirth, exemplified by his 1931 work, Ginza Hukko. Minakami experienced the earthquake not in Tokyo, but in Kamakura, where he witnessed the disaster coastal effect, because there was also a tsunami. Though marginal compared to the devastation in the capital, this personal experience became for him the occasion to think about fragility, renewal, and also the limits of modernity. His writing avoids journalistic or documentary realism, and instead it emphasizes the reflective dimension of the disaster, its cultural and existential significance. From his early post-earthquake text, for instance, we see a deliberate avoidance of sensationalism, which is replaced by a composed meditation on loss and the possibilities of individual and collective recovery. So Ginza Fukko stands as the most emblematic of his, it was early. Ginza Fukko stands as the most emblematic of his earthquake-centered corpus. The story intertwines two parallel processes. The material reconstruction of one of Tokyo's most iconic neighborhoods, Ginza, and the symbolic reconstruction of urban identity and collective memory. In doing so, Minakami engaged critically with Goto Shinpei's ambitious political and urban vision for post-disaster Tokyo. Goto's plan aimed at repairing what was lost, of course, but also at remaking Tokyo into a modern and efficient city, as we have seen. The concept of Fukko, which is in the plan envisioned by Goto and also in the title used by Minakami, Fukko means reconstruction, but it doesn't mean just restore what existed. That would be Fukkyu and not Fukko. Fukko means refound the city along new aesthetic and functional lines. So revitalize, make something better. In Ginza Fukko, Minakami captures and interrogates this discourse through his characters, who are Muta and Yamagishi, who embody contrasting responses to catastrophe and implicitly to Goto's project. Yamagishi is a radical pessimist. He views the disaster as a punishment, as the end of an era. Everything is lost. He had a shop, a luxury kimono shop. The shop is ruined, and this symbolized the demise of art, elegance, and refinement, echoing contemporary debates about the role of literature after the earthquake. He sees what was once cherished as obsolete, as fujitsuyo, something that is not necessary. And this mirrors the disintegration of Ginza itself. Muta, by contrast, represents the modernist optimism aligned with Goto's vision. He articulates the official rationale almost verbatim. The disaster is transient, society progresses regardless, and the earthquake provides the opportunity to reshape Tokyo according to a geometric, functional, and aesthetically pleasing order. Ginza, in this vision, becomes a symbolic center of urban renewal and national progress. Yet Minakami, the author, does not merely juxtapose these perspectives. He stages their collision, exposing the limitations of both. Muta, despite his optimism, emerged as a fragile figure whose personal anxieties predate the earthquake. His attachment to Ginza reflects the modern flanneur's boredom rather than a genuine civic spirit. In this way, Minakami reveals the ambiguity of progressive discourse. Beneath the rhetoric of a collective we should do this, we will make it, etc., lies often an individual projection, a private need cloaked in communal ideas. From an urban literary studies perspective, this is crucial. Reconstruction is never simply a technical or architectural process because it is discursive, it is narrative, it is emotional also. In Ginza Fukko, the neighborhood is a living space where identity, desire, and frustration are generated, and also injustice. Its ruin mirrors the social and psychological collapse of its inhabitants, as in the case of Yamagishi. Physical destruction is also psychological destruction, and urban reconstruction can also be emotional reconstruction or erasure. Even the provisional tavern, the Hachimaki, which is visited regularly by Muta and Yamagishi, functions as a symbolic microcosm, a social laboratory where ideologies, hopes, guilt, and desires collide, each represented by different characters. Here, reconstruction is shown to be non-linear, confronted constantly between survival, ethics, and nostalgia for normality. The rhetoric of progress coexists with material precarity and emotional suffering, which cannot simply be erased. Ginza Fukko thus enters into a critical dialogue with Goto Shinpei's urban vision. It recognizes the imaginative power and ambition of the project, but also exposes its ideological and practical limitations. Modernization, Minakami suggests, is not a natural destiny, but a constructed discourse, a field of conflicts, of illusions, of resistances, and also injustice. Through literature, the post-earthquake city becomes a stage for exploring the interplay of many important things like trauma, memory, and also the contested meaning of progress. So in conclusion, what we have seen today is that, I hope, is that the transformation of literature in Meiji and early modern Japan did not occur in isolation, but evolved in tandem with the physical and symbolic transformation of the city. As Tokyo and other urban centers expanded and modernized, literature responded by emphasizing realism, utility, and effectiveness, mirroring the logic of a society increasingly organized around capitalist production and efficiency. Writers grappled with a city that was constantly in motion, a metropolis being rebuilt and reimagined at dizzying speeds, and they found that traditional narrative density and continuity could no longer fully capture its sprawling and fragmented reality. At the same time, literary practices drew consciously on earlier forms, particularly the Hanjoki, whose economy of expression and focus on individual experience allowed writers to mediate between the vast and often dehumanizing scale of the modern city and the lived experience of its inhabitants. Just as the Hanjoki synthesized episodes and centered human subjectivity, post-earthquake narratives sought to humanize a Tokyo transformed by disaster and modernization and reconstruction. In this way, urban and literary transformation were mutually constitutive. The city changed the literature, and literature offered a perspective through which to understand, inhabit, and confront the rapidly changing urban environment. Ultimately, I think that to study one without the other is to miss the profound dialogue between space, society, and narrative that defines Japan's modern experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an interesting talk. If anybody has some questions or comments, please.
Yes, please. I hope you weren't too bored. Yes.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. While listening to the descriptions of the urban details, I remembered a little bit the contemporary writer Kawakami Mieko, who has very minute descriptions of Osaka. I don't know whether it's Kitashinchi or those Gem Senta, and also she starts the novel with descriptions of how does it feel to live without windows, and so it really reflects this. I'm not sure whether her literature is how do we call it, but it has definitely some reflexes of urban living experience in yes.
Yes, I'm not a specialist of contemporary literature myself. I do translate contemporary literature though, and it always strikes me, and I think it kind of influenced my own research to see how also contemporary Japanese literature has an urban facet that is very, very strong. So since I'm not a specialist, I cannot tell it for sure because it may just be casual that all the novels that I read or that I translate are urban in some way. But it's really striking, and it's not only Tokyo, of course. At the time, Tokyo was particularly interesting because it was becoming a capital. So many things were changing, and then there was the quake and so forth. But there's also, recently, there's also a turn in research towards other centers, and Osaka is one of the main centers. And but I think what Kawakami Mieko does is something similar in a way, although her works are not really about the city. The city is there and conditions the lives of the characters and also their choices, and the emphasis of how it is to live without windows, for instance. It's really interesting because it really takes the space at the center of the experience. It says anything can happen, but it also depends on where you are and how you look at life. And so looking at life without having mirrors through which to look at life means basically looking at yourself, like looking into the inside. And so I have this feeling in Kawakami Mieko's case, the space, be it the space of the city, of the space of the inner space of home, as a crucial role in the way she imagines the world. So yes, of course. So thank you for your comment. And but as I said, and not being a specialist, I don't know if this is something casual or not. It's just by chance or not. But I think there is something, and it probably has roots in earlier ways of representing worlds. Thank you.
And also maybe the portrayal of Kawakami, these marginal characters,
yes,
in her sister works as a hostess, so this is also, it's not like a demi-monde world, but it is quite marginal.
Yes.
I mean, employment that is quite precarious, and so this connection for this also.
Yes, no, it is. And I think it's not just Kawakami, I see it in other writers. Like one of the contemporary Japanese writers that I know the most is Yoshida Shuichi. And he also has, I think in many works of contemporary Japanese literature, there is a sort of tendency to represent characters who has sort of counter images of the salaryman, the OL, like the structured, employed, or the commonsensical character living in society. And most characters, at least the most interesting ones, are characters who are marginal, who stands out from this very strictly codified society. And I think that is very interesting. Existence that there are some novels by Yoshida Shuichi whose protagonists are basically outsiders, and they they really try hard to fit somehow, and they just cannot. And this inability is also reflected in the spaces they inhabit and the place they go through, and it also has a spatial dimension. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So I was thinking about, because this connection, for example, Gessak and Edo period literature, I remember this representation of Delimon. I remember Ihara Saikaku's, for example, Life of Irish Woman. And how did maybe, if you have a comment or maybe an insight, how did the representation of, for example, courtesans or women who are maybe working such kind of work changed in the representations in Hanjoki or, for example, in Nagai Kafu's works, if maybe there is some connection?
Yes. I think it all goes down to the realism of representation. What is interesting about, I think in Saikaku's case, well, Saikaku was mostly inventing, even though he was very realistic representation of certain districts and certain environments. But what really makes Hanjoki stands apart a little bit from that tradition is that they were born, like Terakado's Hanjoki is the first one, and it's in a later stage of the Tokugawa area, and it was a period of crisis. And so they're really, really interested in the way the brothels or geisha houses and other kind of like sex working and entertainment actors behave was in crisis, and so they were really striving and competing with each other, and so they're really interested in the pleasure quarter and the demi-monde as a sort of economic system more than as an aesthetic world made of beauty. Saikaku is striking because he does kind of the same thing, because in Saikaku's description, the world of the geisha is never idealized. So he uses also this digging technique to expose the irony and the hypocrisy. But he does it in order to have stories come out of it, which is something that doesn't seem so crucial for the Hanjoki authors. Kafu, on the other hand, had a more complex take on the demi-monde, because I have the feeling that he was studying the Edo and the early Meiji era demi-monde through the Hanjoki rather than, say, Chikamatsu or Ihara Saikaku and so forth. So he was really more interested in the reality of the demi-monde. And on that, he just constructed his own vision of the demi-monde, which was utterly modern. He's often said to be a nostalgic author, an author who turned to the past. And I'm really much against this vision, because I think that, yes, he turned to the past, but he was not necessarily a nostalgic. He used the past because the past was a sort of, was a way to make the critical differences stand apart, and they were fully exposed like that. But it was really interesting. The world he describes is modern, is Taisho and is Showa, and that's why I think Tanizaki's comment is on point, as you would expect from Tanizaki. It's true, it's a popular history of the Showa era, even though it looks a lot like something earlier, but he was really focused on the problems and the tensions and the conflicts of his own era. So yes, that's basically, I think. I don't know if it's answers your question, but yeah.
Maybe a question from our audience online.
I don't know if, but maybe it's better if.
You can maybe write or type in chat or maybe ask.
it's been very long, and and so yeah.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation, and actually it's very interesting how you combine the transformation of urban spaces with literature and analyze these aspects. As you can see from your research, actually urban space is and the changes within society as such are well represented also in the literature. We can follow it. I wanted to ask you if there are some tendencies in literature, various genres, how these things are described actually in a different way.
You understand? There are some
Differences in
How?
how these
in genre.
elements and changes in society and urban spaces are actually differently described in different genres.
Yes, yes, thank you. Yeah, there is actually, I skipped on the Daitokyo Hanjoki, which was actually interesting from this point of view, because it was a collection of contributions from many writers at the time. And some of them were journalists, some were writers, some were poets, for instance. And everyone described the change in the city in their own way. So you would have some, like from journalists, of course, you would have something more realist or information-based. On novelists, you would have something like what I have been describing about Kafu or Minakami. And there were also poets who were probably the most keen to register, to record the effects of urban change and social change on the lives of people. So there are some poems inside the Daitokyo Hanjoki which describe very well how the modernization, the reconstruction was impacting life. I am really interested in Hanjoki because Hanjoki are not properly, one of the reasons I'm interested in it is that basically every writer, every famous novelist was reading Hanjoki, yet I hadn't heard of them until I graduated, went to Japan, began my PhD. So it's something that really struck me, how something so influential could be like forgotten. But the reason I'm interested in it is that it defies the categories of genre in a way, because it's not properly fiction, it's not a novel, it's not gesaku, but it's not just journalism, it's not really essay, so it's something in between. And I think it somehow set a standard for all modern genres and when they turn to the city. For instance, I do not really work on drama, for instance, but there are many, of course, modern style dramas during the Meiji Taisho period that also seem to resort to a set of images that come from this Hanjoki corpus of the Hanjoki imagery. So I don't know if there is really a difference in portraying different aspects of social and urban change. There is, of course, a different way, a different focus in each genre, also related to the genre itself and its specificity. So I think it is quite natural for poetry to concentrate on emotions and on on repetition. For instance, the poems from poets of the period who describe urban spaces, talking about also other urban spaces, are characterized by a sort of repetition of sounds, of images, which is a trademark of modern urban life. At the same time, in drama, you can have in theater, you can theatrical writing, you can have like more symbolic figures embodying different aspects of life in the city. Something I'm working at the moment, it's really a work in progress, so I don't even know if I should be saying it, but I'm trying to work on drama that was written by Miki, Miki Takeji, who was Morioka's brother. Who would become a drama critic, a theater critic, and so forth. And he wrote very early in the Meiji period a drama which is called Shikukaise Gukan no Yume. So the Shikukaise is the modernization, the redistribution of the quarters of Tokyo in the 1870s, and Gukan no Yume is the dream of a stupid, the dream of a person who's not very smart, and I'm trying to find this drama because it could be an example of how the theater also was looking at this urban phenomenon, but really at the urban phenomenon in itself. It's very hard to find because I suspect it's not a great work. And it's mostly considered, I mean, only one person, as far as I know, has ever studied this work, and he describes it as a way, and he's an architect, so that this is, I think, very interesting. And he describes this work as a way for Miki to emphasize Ogai's ideas about urban change. But I think it's interesting that also someone who was writing drama would actually turn to the city, showing that it really was something that people felt as crucial, as very important at the time. So yeah, this was an extra thing to the answer to your question, and something I'm really looking into because the drama is almost, I couldn't find it in Japan. Now I'm trying to do my best. If you ever heard of it, if you ever hear of it, please let me know, because I'm looking for it desperately.
Anyone else?
Yes.
You mentioned America was the concept of demi-monde to depict the moral ambiguities of places like Ginza and outsiders and the incapability of adapting by the outsiders. Who would the outsiders be?
Yes, in Kafu's, there is something important about Kafu that I didn't mention. Kafu came from a very well-to-do family. He was really bourgeois, coming from the Yamanote. Yet he was really attracted to the world of the Shitamachi and also, of course, the demi-monde. When he speaks of moral ambiguity and the difficulty to adapt, he's speaking of two different things. The moral ambiguity is the hypocrisy of people who actually, of Yamanote people who actually want to marginalize publicly the demi-monde while spending all their months there, which is something very old and which we know about, I think, virtually every country in the world. It's not just something that happened in Japan. Even though in Japan it was very important because actually the business in the Taisho and Showa era was basically happened in the demi-monde quarter, so during the night. About the incapability to adapt, this is a big, crucial topic in Kafu's literature because he would spend most of his life close to the demi-monde, going there, interacting with actors, with geisha, with maids. It really appeared as his dream to fit in that world. But then somehow he himself and also his characters seem unable to really fit into that kind of world. And so it is as if he, at some point in his life, he realizes that he is an outsider to that world, and that in the same way as let's say, the real world excludes and marginalizes that kind of environment, that environment is actually excluding him. And so this was really a tension that was crucial into his work, and I think also into his life. Just to say one thing, he repeatedly said that after his death, he wanted to be buried in the Jokanji cemetery, which is very close to Yoshiwara. and hosts a monument for the sex workers who would die and whose body would not be reclaimed by anyone. So they would be buried in the Jokanji cemetery. In actually a very bad way, the Jokanji is also known as Nagekomidera, which means the temple where something is just pushed inside. And what was pushed inside were the bodies. So when these prostitutes in the late Tokugawa era died, and they had no families who wanted to take the bodies back, they would be just thrown into the present. And that is something very cruel. And they have even now, so if you go to Tokyo and you want to go, it's really a nice experience, I think. They have this monument for them. And he really wanted to be buried because he used to go there to pay homage to them, to bring flowers. It was very important to him. And he said he wanted to be buried there. But then his family did not follow his indication. He is buried in Zoshigaya, which is the same cemetery where Natsume Soseki, for instance, and other important writers are buried. But it's not where he wanted to be. And this is the reason why the Japanese fan club in the early 1960s built for him a monument in the Jokanji. So if you go to the Jokanji now, you see the monument to the sex workers, and beside that there is the monument to Nagai Kafu with one of his poems engraved. And this was an initiative of the fan club, and actually of Tanizaki Ichiro. He was the one who really pushed for it. But this explains how his origins, his bourgeois origins, actually influenced his entire life, and even his death and after death, because what he really wanted to do never happened. And I think this is kind of sad, but then Tanizaki managed to find a solution. So, yes.
Okay. If there are no more questions, we can then close this our lecture, finish our lecture. Thank you for all the online guests who participated and listened, and we are really grateful for your talk, and thank you. Thank you for all.
Thank you for bearing with me for such a long time. I can